busy city of Akwa had its fair share of the wealthy elite, but few families stood out, like Chief Lawson and Mrs. Becker. Their names were likened with success. Their business empires cut across oil and gas and real estate. Their mansion was one of the tallest buildings in the neighborhood. But within the nobility of their wealth and influence, their greatest pride was the adoption of twin sisters, Jane and Janet. Mr. Lawson and Mrs. Becker have been childless for years and have tried all medical options, but all seemed abortive, and both couples decided to opt for adoption. When Chief Lawson and Mrs. Becker first laid eyes on the twins at the orphanage, they saw Jane and Janet as an embodiment of boldness with their cute little charming smile that drew the attention of Mrs. Becker and Chief Lawson, and they decided to adopt the beautiful twin sisters. From that day forward, the Lawson household was never the same again. The sisters were raised with the finest of everything. They went to the best schools in town, had their private tutors, and endless opportunities. However, from early, the differences in their personalities began to show. As they grew older, the differences between Jane and Janet became more evident. Janet was the brilliant one, always calm and calculated, have excelled in all her studies with flying colors. Her teachers loved her for her intelligence, consistently topping her grades and often being celebrated by her teachers for her good grades, and often being celebrated for her discipline and humility. Her ambition was to oversee the family's business empire, and she worked tirelessly to earn her parents' trust. Jane, on the other hand, was a stark opposite of her sister's behavior. She loved the attention her good looks brought to her, and she was drawn to the wide side of life. She frequented the nightclubs, got involved with questionable friends, and constantly found herself in trouble. Despite this, Chief Lawson and Mrs. Becker adored her. They were blinded by the love they had for both of their daughters, unable to see the growing darkness within Jane. One night, after a particular wide night out, Jane came into the mansion at night, her makeup looking so tattered and her clothes messy. Janet was seated at the study room, engrossed in her laptop, doing research on the upcoming exam. Out all night again? Janet asked softly, not looking up from her laptop. Jane's eyes flared up. What is it to you, Miss Perfect? You are not my mother. Janet sighed, knowing better than not to argue. I just worry about you, Jane. Worry about yourself, Jane spat back before storming upstairs angrily from what her sister just said to her. By the time they were in their 20s, the sisters' paths had fully diverged. Janet had just graduated with top honors from a prestigious university, returning home to accolades from her parents. Jane, on the other hand, had dropped out from college, preferring the thrill of nightlife and the company of men who catered for her whims. One evening, Chief Lawson gathered the family for an important announcement. Janet, he began, his voice filled with pride. Your mother and I have decided that you will take over as CEO of the Lawson Enterprise when I retire next year. Looking at us now, you will know that age is no longer by our side. Though I will be stepping down, but I will still oversee the activities of the company. You have proven yourself worthy of taking over the company's affairs, he continued. Janet's eyes widened in shock. Daddy, are you serious? I don't know what to say. Oh my God. Mrs. Becker beamed her eyes in misty pride. You worked so hard for it, my dear, and you deserve the very best. In the corner of the room, Jane's hand clenched into a fist. Her blood boiled with jealousy. Everything always went to Janet. The praise, the success, the affection. Now she's going to inherit the family's empire too. That should have been me, Jane thought bitterly, her mind swelling with resentment. She stormed out of the room, her parents too distracted by Janet to notice her. Hey lovelies, hope you've subscribed to this channel. If you haven't, please hit the subscribe button, like and comment, and stay tuned to know what happened at the end of this wonderful story. And big ups to my founding subscribers. Over the following months, Jane's bitterness festered. She couldn't bear the sight of Janet, always calm, always perfect, always loved. Every time their parents praised Janet for her achievements, it was like a knife in Jane's heart. Jane began to act out more aggressively. She would throw wide parties at the mansion without permission, damage expensive properties, and even flirt with Janet's suitors just to spite her. Despite all this, Janet remained kind, forgiving to her sister time after time. One night, after one of Jane's wide gatherings, Janet approached her in the garden where Jane was smoking. Jane, this has to stop. I know you're upset, but we are family. You don't have to do this to yourself, Janet pleaded. Jane turned to her, eyes narrowed. Upset? You think I'm upset? Because I'm not a boring bookworm like you? I think you're angry because you feel like you've lost something, Janet replied softly. Lost something? You've taken everything from me, Janet. Jane's voice rose, her hands trembling with barely concealed anger. They are giving the company to you. They love you more. I'm nothing in this family. That's not true, Jane, Janet began, but Jane cut her off. Shut up! Just shut up! Jane screamed, throwing her cigarette to the ground and stamping it out. You don't know anything about how I feel. I hate you! Janet recoiled, her heart breaking. Jane, I love you. I just want us to be sisters again. But Jane turned her back on her, walking away with a chilling finality. As time passed, Jane's jealousy turned to hatred, and her hatred to malice. One evening, while drinking with some of her reckless friends, an idea began to form in Jane's mind. A dark, terrible idea. Why don't you just get rid of her? One of her friends suggested, after Jane spent hours complaining about Janet. Jane's heart raced. Can I really do this to my only twin sister? She thought within herself. Can I eliminate the one person who had always stood in my way? Her mind spiraled and she began to plot something truly horrifying. Days later, Jane stood in front of a mirror, holding a bottle of acid she had secretly acquired. Her hand trembled as she stared at her reflection. If Janet were gone, everything would be mine. The love, the company, the wealth, it would all finally belong to me alone. But even as her jealousy raged, a sliver of doubt crept in. That evening, Jane walked into Janet's room, the acid hidden behind her back. Janet was sitting at her desk, working on some of the documents for the company. She looked up and smiled. Hey Jane, do you need something? For a moment, Jane hesitated. The love in her sister's eyes was like a chain holding her back, but the jealousy inside her screamed louder. No, Jane whispered, her hand tightening around the bottle of acid. I don't need anything. Janet, sensing something was wrong, stood up and walked towards her sister. Jane, are you okay? You're shaking. I said I'm fine, Jane shouted, her hand trembling as she brought the bottle of acid forward. But before she could act, a crash echoed from downstairs. Their parents had come home early. The sound startling Jane enough to stop her in her tracks. "What's going on?" Mrs. Becker called out from the bottom of the stairs. Jane quickly shoved the bottle into her pocket, her heart racing as her plans crumbled before her. Janet, oblivious to how close she had come to danger, looked concerned. "Let's go downstairs," Janet said gently, grabbing Jane's arm. "We can talk about this later, okay?" Jane's plan had failed, but her hatred only grew. She became more erratic, often locking herself in her room, her mind consumed by dark thoughts. She avoided Janet, unable to face the sister she had almost harmed. One evening, as Chief Lawson and Mrs. Becker prepared for a family dinner, they called both sisters to the table. "We've noticed tension between the two of you," Chief Lawson said, his voice thin. "What's going on?" Janet looked down, hesitant to speak. She didn't want to burden her parents with Jane's behavior. But Jane, her face a mask of false calm, smiled sweetly. "Nothing, Daddy. Janet's just been stressed about work, that's all." Mrs. Becker raised an eyebrow. "Janet? Stressed? That doesn't sound like her at all." Jane's smile tightened. "It's true. Maybe she's just not ready to handle the company after all." Chief Lawson frowned. "What are you saying, Jane?" "I'm just saying, maybe you should reconsider who you're putting in charge," Jane said smoothly, her eyes glinting with malice. But Janet, ever the peacemaker, simply smiled. "Jane, it's okay. I know you're upset, but we can work together. The company is big enough for both of us." Chief Lawson and Mrs. Becker exchanged glances, clearly concerned by Jane's increasing erratic behavior. The tension in the Lawson household reached its peak when one day Jane disappeared. She left no note, no explanation, just an empty room and the echoes of her resentment. For weeks, the family searched for her, fearing the worst. Janet, heartbroken but determined, took on the responsibility of the company as planned, her parents fully backing her. But despite her success, a shadow lingered over her heart, a deep wound left by her sister she had once loved so dearly. Then, one rainy evening, Jane returned. She was a shadow of her former self, tired, disheveled, and broken. She stood at the front door, soaked from the rain, her eyes hollow with regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered when Janet opened the door. Janet, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and sadness, pulled her sister into a tight embrace. "I love you, Jane," she whispered, her voice trembling. For the first time in years, Jane wept. All the bitterness, the jealousy, the hatred, it all dissolved in the warmth of her sister's arms. She had lost herself in her envy, but now, standing in the embrace of the only person who had truly loved her, she felt the weight of her choices. The path to redemption wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Jane was willing to try. And so, the Lawson sisters, once torn apart by jealousy and hatred, began the long painful journey back to each other. Their bond, though scarred, was stronger than it has ever been before. Hello lovelies, hope you enjoyed this story. Though it might seem short, but I'm just trying to tell a story about the level of envy and jealousy, if not contained, what it can escalate into. Trust you find this story interesting. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel at African Storytales by AB. Like and share with family and friends, and stay tuned for more interesting and mind-blowing story coming your way. I remain your favorite storyteller, African Storytales by AB. Bye.